Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and I'm here to review the much anticipated Venom movie. So, Venom's been getting a lot of attention recently because this is Sony trying to do their own thing because they're like, well, Marvel has like shared rights with Spider-Man, but we still want to do our own thing, so we're going to try to do it. And they're not doing the greatest so far. And there's a lot of reviews coming out before the release of Venom and it getting like panned, like getting really bad reviews. But then the audience ratings ridiculously high. Last time I checked, it was in the high 80s. So obviously there's a big divide. And to be perfectly honest, I'm like, it was fine. It wasn't like complete garbage. Like people were like, this is a Catwoman movie, like of the 2000s. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not that bad. That's kind of ridiculous, and that's being really harsh. But like this movie's kind of a mess. It's a bit of a mixed bag, and Ruben Fleischer, who is the director of this film, who did Zombieland, which I love Zombieland, and I'm super excited that they're making another one. And what he could have brought to this was this being a really cool, dark comedy with like horror elements. And there are pieces of both of those things, but kind of strangely mixed into this film. I kind of see this film as like split into two halves, and it's the moment that like Venom becomes like Venom, versus what's before that and what's after that. And before that, this feels like a lot more serious, kind of like horror thriller kind of thing, where there are some really tense and well structured scenes that do build tension and are intense, and I was really impressed by that. And I'm not really surprised because I know Ruben Fleischer is a talented director, but then this shifts completely with its gears to being something just like much more of a straightforward like superhero kind of movie, except it's a little darker because like Venom eats people and stuff like that, so it's kind of like he's not a goody two shoes. He's an anti hero, and he's a sassy one at that, but I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But it kind of has some tonal issues, and from a storytelling perspective, the pacing is a little off because there's parts where it really takes its time building up at the beginning of this film, and then it feels like it's a sprint at the end. And things feel a little anticlimactic because it gets all rushed together at the end. It's just like, and I don't know why, because honestly, when you take the credits out, this movie was like an hour and 35 minutes. I'm like, if they just gave the third act a little more time to like build, I felt like this film could have been better, but for some reason it feels really rushed. And honestly, it's like, did I feel a true emotional connection to the characters in this movie? Not really. And like, I thought maybe two of them were fun to watch, and arguably they're the same character. But they're not really. But it's kind of like you didn't really feel a connection, you don't really feel that emotional heft that other films recently in this genre have been able to do, and this film kind of just like half-asses it. This does remind me a lot more of what superhero movies were like before the MCU or Christopher Nolan Batman films, and it's kind of like moving backwards a little bit, and creatively it wasn't as interesting or well done as a lot of other superhero films recently. It's kind of hard when your bar is set with Logan last year and then you kind of get something like this and it's just like, don't really care. But in terms of the writing, the screenplay was done by Jeff Pinkner, Scott Rosenberg, and Kelly Marcel, which usually when you get up to more than maybe two screenwriters, things get a little messy. This was a little messy, and the story was, it has a very like Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing going on, and I appreciated that, and that those aspects of the film worked. The dynamic between Eddie and Venom was definitely the most interesting part of this film, and were the most engaging parts. And was the dialogue always super clever? Not really. The whole turd in the wind thing is kind of like not good, but I thought that their banter back and forth was definitely one of the more interesting parts of the film, which you really don't get until later in the film, unfortunately. But like, I felt like they set up an decently interesting story, but it feels very cliched because it's like it's not something very unique. It feels like a mashup of a bunch of other stories kind of thrown together. And in terms of like the dialogue, a lot of the characters have a lot of exposition, and the characters themselves are really two-dimensional. And I feel bad for some of the actors because they really didn't have much to work with. But like Tom Hardy really brings out like Eddie Brock as a character and makes him a lot more interesting than he probably would have been written down in the script, because he brings a lot of like physical acting and tics and stuff like that, and how he speaks and how he delivers lines makes it a lot more interesting and kind of distracts you from the fact that some of the lines are really stupid. But him and Venom's really sassy and an interesting kind of character, and their dynamic's interesting, and how they're both kind of losers, which is surprising, and them being brought together. But like the villains, blah, in this movie, and Carlton Drake, this Elon Musk kind of, and then mad scientist kind of mixed in, and then he becomes a symbiote, and it's kind of like not in it that much and not really that interesting. And honestly, the third act is just kind of thrown together at the end. And to be perfectly honest with the action in this film, there's some parts that are really well done and entertaining action sequences. And then the final battle between Riot and Venom is just CGI mess, and couldn't even see anything because it looked so bad how it was shot. I'm just like, I had to look away because it was hurting my eyes, honestly, because it was just so much just like stuff being thrown at the screen, and it was obnoxious. And really, when it comes down to it, the cinematography by Matthew Liebate, sorry, I don't know if I'm saying your name right, but he's a very famous cinematographer who did a lot of films for Darren Aronofsky, and like, there's some cool things with how this film is shot a lot of the time, except for like some of the action and the CGI, but like it felt like it was inspired, at least how you shot it. But the biggest thing that stood out to me, most memorable thing, is the score from this by Ludwig Göransson, and that's a very intense and actually very memorable and cool score to this film, and it caught my attention from the very beginning, and I'm like, holy crap, I wonder what this film would be like, a lot of the sequences, if this music wasn't so great, because it really did build up tension, and during the action sequences built up a lot of like energy and really helped those scenes work. Performance wise, Tom Hardy does great. I love Tom Hardy, and if it wasn't Tom Hardy in this movie, this probably wouldn't be anywhere near as positive of a review as I'm giving this. And Michelle Williams does a really good job with almost nothing to do. So she really tries, and I appreciate the performance. Riz Ahmed was kind of just wasted, and Jenny Slate was like, hey Jenny, go read some exposition, and that's basically it. And overall, this movie is kind of meh. It's not something that I would be like, go check this out, this was great. No. Was it awful? No. And if you're really into superhero movies, go check this out, because you'll probably enjoy it on some level. If you're not, then this definitely isn't for you, and it doesn't really transcend this kind of genre that would interest other people. But those are my thoughts. It's not a great movie. It's not a horrible movie. It's kind of just there. Maybe next time they'll do better. I'm just going to look forward to Marvel's next movie. But thank you as always for checking in with your Wasteland Reviewer, and always thank you for your support.